Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my power rankings after the 2023 Austrian Grand Prix. So starting in 20th, this driver stays in the same position as last race, and that is Nick de Vries. For de Vries, a bit of a sloppy weekend again. I know he did beat his teammate in the race, but he was out-qualified by him in both, I believe, both the sprint and the proper qualifying session. In the race, he did pick up that 5-second penalty for his bit of a clumsy clash with Magnussen though. So staying in 20th is Nick de Vries. Now in 19th, staying in the same position as well, but this was a driver that I did actually consider putting up in 18th, and that is Logan Sargent. Was out-qualified and was out-raced by his teammate Albon again, but in the race it was actually much closer than it's been in previous races. And the races coming up in the traditional European leg of the season, they are tracks that Logan should know. So much like with Piastri, these are races where he really has a chance to prove himself on tracks that he already knows. And he was a bit better this weekend, I thought. Now number 18, moving down 4 positions, and this was the driver that I considered switching with Sargent, but for this driver, I think Kevin Magnussen. I think their qualifying is really hurting them this season. Nico Hülkenberg's clearly showing that car has some real serious pace in qualifying, and in circumstances like the sprint race where it's a bit of a shorter race, tire life, tire management isn't as important. They do have the potential to get some points from time to time. But, for Magnussen, he's really been struggling in qualifying compared to his teammate Hülkenberg. And as a result, I've moved him down 4 positions. I know in the races proper, they've really been struggling with tire life, so I'm not really as critical for that. But for Magnussen, he really needs to up his game in qualifying. Now number 17, dropping 5 positions from last time. This driver had a pretty scrappy race, I thought, and that is Oscar Piastri. Now I know many people will say that he was not running the upgrades that Norris was, and I agree. I know that's a fair point. But that being said, was out-qualified in both the sprint and sprint qualifying by Norris. And in the race, he did have a bit of a clumsy race. He damaged his front wing, running into the back of Magnussen's Haas at turn 3, had to pit for a new front wing, and his race was basically over at that point. So a bit of a small clumsy error though, but he's still learning, he's still young. But that being said, I've moved him down 5 positions. Number 16, moving up 1 position, a bit of a better race for Zhou, I thought. For Zhou, beat Bottas in 3 of the 4 meaningful sessions we had, including both the sprint and the race, so that's definitely a good sign. And I don't know, there isn't really a whole lot to say given how anonymous those lower teams are, especially if they're not crashing or really getting into incidents, which I guess for Zhou is a good thing because it means he's keeping it clean and he's keeping it on the road. Number 15, dropping 4 positions after a really solid race last time out, and that is Valtteri Bottas. So for Bottas, I think his qualifying has been alright, but I think his races has been one thing after another, and I don't know if they'll come out and say, oh, he had damage again this time. But at this point, the race was not particularly good for Bottas. He was behind his teammate Zhou in both the sprint and in the race. So as a result, I've dropped him 4 positions. Now number 14, this driver has recovered quite a bit after last race, but that being said, still not great, and that is Sergio Perez. So had another really poor qualifying session during the main qualifying, made up for it in the sprint, and made for it somewhat in the main race coming back to P3. But that being said, that car should have been a clear 1-2 finish for Red Bull. And it wasn't, so I can't really say that he's doing what he should be doing. But that being said, he did recover to a podium, which is something he hadn't been doing recently. Let's see, number 13, moving up 2 places. I was actually somewhat surprised by this driver, and that is Lance Stroll. Out-qualified Alonso for only the 2nd time this year, beat him in the sprint. Of course, the race proper didn't really go the way they thought. That being said, I don't think he had an awful race. I think that Aston's strategy was absolutely baffling at points today. The decision to not pit, the lap right after the virtual safety car was called, I think really hurt Stroll. Alonso, it didn't hurt as much, but the fact that they had to double stack because Stroll is actually too close to Alonso for once, I think really hurt Stroll's race long term. But that being said, a bit of a better race this weekend, so Stroll moves up 2 positions. Number 12, and one of the stars of the sprint was Nico Hülkenberg. So finishing 6th place in the sprint, absolutely fantastic result for him, and he thought he had an absolutely amazing sprint race. The race wasn't so good. He was able to get a couple positions at the start, but then kind of started dropping through the field and eventually retired with that mechanical DNF. But that being said, still really, really strong result. And if he can replicate those qualifying performances on some of the other sprint weekends, maybe he can get a couple more points later in the year. Now, number 11, pretty rough weekend and probably the worst weekend of the season. Dropping down 3 spots is Yuki Tsunoda. So for Tsunoda, bit of a rough weekend. Sprint and the sprint qualifying, I think, weren't so bad. But in the main race, he went too aggressive at turn 1, got that front wing damage, and then went flying through the gravel at turn 4. His race was basically ruined at that point, but on top of that, he picked up two penalties, 5-second penalty and 10-second penalty for track limits, and he was the only driver to pick up those penalties during the race. I know other drivers got those penalties after the race finished, but during the race he was the only one to be given that 10-second penalty. So a bit of a sloppy weekend for Tsunoda. That being said, the car wasn't really capable of getting points this weekend given how few DNFs there were as well. Now number 10, moving up 3 positions, a bit of a better weekend for this driver, but still not amazing. I think he really kind of moved up because and benefited from Tsunoda and a couple other drivers moving down. But for Gasly, finished in 10th place in the race. The sprint wasn't so good, but the main race was honestly pretty good. And I think he had a pretty solid race for the most part, and he finished P9 on the road, which is really the most that they could have asked for. I think Norris was too far ahead in the McLaren, but of course got demoted because of that track limits penalty. Number 9, moving up 1 position, a bit of a better weekend for this driver, and that is George Russell. So for Russell, the sprint was pretty good, but he made that really clever strategy call to pit 4 slick tires, and that gave him basically 1 point in the sprint. The main race itself was a bit more anonymous. He did have another rough qualifying session. That's something I've kind of noticed with Russell this year. Qualifying hasn't really been as strong as it was to start the season. He's kind of been out-qualified, I think, for 4 races on the bounce by Hamilton. So that's something that he's going to be wanting to improve in the coming races. But that being said, does finish ahead of Hamilton because of those penalties. Number 8, moving up 1 position, I thought actually a pretty good race for this driver, and that is Carlos Sainz. I thought he was maybe a bit unfortunate at the start, although it's possible he kind of he ate up his tires a bit too quickly just to try to force the team's hand, because he knew that if he didn't get him right at the start, that the team would just favor Leclerc all the way to the end. But that being said, I thought a pretty good race for this driver, Sainz, and he had a really good sprint race as well. Number 7, moving down 3 positions, is Esteban Ocon. So for Ocon, a whole lot of penalties. I believe I saw online somewhere that he actually set a new F1 record for the most penalties in a single race. That being said, they were pretty, except for the pit lane one where he had an unsafe relief, which is really on the team. I think 3 penalties for track limits, I believe, or maybe it was 4. But that being said, not a great race for him. That being said, there were so many track limits penalties, I'm not going to hold it too much against any one driver. If there was one driver getting tons and tons of penalties, but no one else was getting penalties, I would say, yeah, you should probably be a bit more careful. But given all the chaos that we saw with track limits during the race yesterday, I'm being a bit more lenient with that today. But not as great of a race as previous races, so he moves down 3 positions. Number 6, moving down 1 position, I thought this driver had really made the most of the machinery, but there was one driver who I have moving up. So this driver, Albon, moves down. A bit of a better weekend. I think the qualifying was definitely the highlight. Had pretty good result in both the main qualifying and sprint qualifying. Race wasn't really there, and I think the on this track on the Red Bull ring, I think overtaking's too easy. So unfortunately for Albon, he can't just make these massive long trains behind him because the other cars can overtake him pretty easily. Now moving into the top 5, let's see. So starting with number 5, second podium of the season for this driver, moving up 2 spots, and that is Charles Leclerc. Really good main race for him. The sprint, I don't know what happened in the sprint. He finished outside the points and didn't look nowhere. And then today for the main Grand Prix, he looked really good, really kept it clean, and he basically just built the gap to Sainz, although the team helped a little bit with that. He didn't really have a chance of the win ever, even though he was leading for it, and he did hold off Perez for P3. So that's beating one Red Bull is definitely an achievement given how fast it is this year. Number 4, moving down 2 positions, not a great weekend I thought for this driver, and that is Lewis Hamilton. For Hamilton, I don't know, the sprint, he messed up the timing of his qualifying, his sprint qualifying, did recover but didn't get any points from that. And in the main race, I didn't think he looked that good. I think he's had much better races recently, and the fact that he was losing to Norris in a McLaren, that's definitely a slower car than the McLaren, than the Mercedes, was also not a great sign. And given all the track limits, penalties and stuff, he was eventually, I think he eventually finished 8th. So not a great weekend for Hamilton, and as a result drops 2 positions. Now probably my driver of the weekend, or at least of the race, is moving up, let's see, how many positions? 3 positions, and that is Lando Norris. So for Norris, a really excellent race I thought for him. He had finishing P4 in a McLaren with that few retirements is a major achievement for him. So, and that's an absolutely massive improvement compared to where they were at the start of the season. So now into the top 2, and this isn't really any kind of, it's not particularly hard to figure out who's number 1. So I'm just going to talk about number 2 right now. So Fernando Alonso, pretty good race. I don't think he really had made the most out of the car, but that being said, he did have a pretty good race. I think maybe Aston Martin didn't have enough time to find the right setup with the new upgrades coming on the car with only 1 practice session. So that being said, we're being a bit more lenient with the overall car performance. That being said, was out-qualified by Stroll in the main Grand Prix and was beaten by Stroll in the sprint, which is not great. But that being said, I did think he had a better weekend than Hamilton, and I didn't want to move up Norris too much, so that's why Alonso moves up 1 position, kind of inherits Hamilton's P2 from last power ranking. Now number 1, this isn't really, I guess I should probably just write this. I'm tempted to write Verstappen and just paint it onto the whiteboard, so that way I don't have to write it every week. But for Verstappen, another great weekend. Let's see, did he get full points? Yes, he did. He did get full points. He got sprint win, race win, and fastest lap as well. So maximum number of points for Verstappen this weekend. He looked absolutely fantastic. He even, what did he do? He even decided to pit with 2 laps to spare to take the fastest lap from Perez. So tons of confidence, tons of speed, and he's really just in a league of his own. And the fact that Perez is struggling to kind of get up to that P2 spot, struggling to get those really good results that he is, does show that I think that the Red Bull, shows that how great he is consistently. And the fact that even though the Red Bull is a fantastic car, you still need to be there. You still need to be consistent and not make mistakes to be able to get those results. And that's exactly what Verstappen's been doing. So that's all for my power rankings after the Austrian Grand Prix. Hopefully this video actually uploads in reasonable time. It doesn't take, 2 days to upload like it seems like all my race reviews have, which does not really help their performance at all. So if you could, please check those out as well. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, we have a double header, so British Grand Prix preview will be out later this week. Goodbye.